Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Curator Talk. Tonight's discussion is focused on our newest exhibition at the Washington State Museum, All the Sacrifices You've Made, Todos los Sacrificios que has hecho, which opens Saturday, February 5th. My name is Len Bailly, and I'm a program coordinator at the Washington State Historical Society. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Washington State Historical Society is located on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we pay respect to their elders, past and present. I would also like to thank everyone who has participated in our online programming these last few years. Please visit our website at washingtonhistory.org for information on upcoming exhibitions and programs. The museum is currently open to view all of our exhibitions, and as we begin to pivot back to in-person programming, please consider becoming a member. I will post a link in the chat for you to learn how. And tonight's program is a discussion with exhibit curators, Borderland Collective's Jason Reed and Mark Medhiva, and the former director of the College Assistance Migrant Program at the University of Washington, Luz Niges. Jason Reed is a Texas-based artist and educator with a background in geography. His work deals with the confluence of land, politics, and visual histories. He is a professor of photography and the Jones Professor of Southwestern Studies at Texas State University, and holds a BA in geography from the University of Texas and an MFA in photography from Illinois State University. Reed has created gallery and public space exhibitions in venues such as Art Pace in San Antonio, Krannert Museum at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, Storefront Windows in Miles, Texas, Gallery Reintaler in Vienna, Austria, Dallas Contemporary, La Asamblea Legislativa in Mexico City, and the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Mark Medhiva is a San Antonio-based artist and associate professor in the School of Art and Design at Texas State University. His work explores diverse subjects through photography, archives, oral history, and participatory project structures. He holds a BA in social work from Baylor University and an MFA in social practice from Portland State University. He is engaged in projects at venues, including the Rothko Chapel, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art, the Houston Center for Photography, and San Antonio Museum of Art, the Puerto Rican Museum of Art and Culture, Blue Star Contemporary Art Museum, and the Krannert Art Museum. Luz Niges is a mother of two, a wife, and a friend to many. She is a Mexican woman who loves and honors her mestizo heritage, Luz is an immigrant from very humble beginnings and has witnessed firsthand how systems are not made to support our communities of color. She chooses to rise up and support the most disenfranchised community. Luz is passionate about leaving the world a better place, and she is passionate about helping dismantle institutional racism and inequities among students and staff of color. Please join me in welcoming Jason Reed, Mark Medhiva, and Luz Niges. Thank you, everybody.
Len, thank you so much for that nice introduction. And thank you to everybody who is joining us on here. A project like this does not happen alone, as many of you know. And so I just want to start off just by thanking some really important people. The first is Mary Michael Stump, curator there at the museum. And Mary Michael, without her, this project would not be happening. Jennifer Kilmer, for all of your support. Gwen Whiting, Ed Nolan, Andrea Walsh, and Andrew Trussler, all there at the museum who have made this exhibition happen. Luz, thank you. This project really would not be happening. As I listened to your bio, all I could do was just shake my head yes and feel my heart swell for just the work that you do, not just in your community, but in your own home with your family. You care so deeply about them. So thank you for everything. Natalia Esquivel Silva as well, one of your former staff members, Andres Unate, Courtney Sabin, and Gonzalo Guzman for all of your support throughout this whole project. And most importantly, or very importantly, we also want to thank the students and their families, Orfil Olmos, Moises Mendez, Alondra Torres, and Gabby Ruiz. The work that we're going to talk about tonight is made by all of you, by all of us. And so we just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for being here. Also, I just want to acknowledge that I am carrying some sadness not being able to be together in person, right? This project started 4 years ago. We took 3 trips there, which was planned to open 2 years ago, right? But because of COVID, we are not. And part of the sadness that I carry is because there was so much joy when we were together working on this. The amount of laughter was great. And so just want to acknowledge that and just hope that today, that all of you that are joining us, that you are safe and healthy and that your loved ones are doing well. I want to give you just a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to be doing this evening. In just a minute, Jason is going to be sharing a little bit about the history of Borderland Collective and how we kind of got to where we are now. Then we're going to shift and turn and talk about the exhibition. And Luce is going to talk a little bit about the camp program. And the 3 of us are going to talk about how we came to make the work that we did. And then we are going to get an opportunity to experience the work. Unfortunately, the work is not installed in the gallery. It will be installed next week, but there are a couple ways that we're going to be able to experience what you're going to find in the galleries. The first is we're going to be able to watch a video of the work that will be in there. And then the second is we're going to be able to reflect together on some questions that are going to be presented inside of the space, and then be able to have an opportunity to share out. And then after that, we'll have some more traditional kind of Q&A, which will all take place in the chat box down at the bottom. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop something in the chat. We'll get to it when we can. If you have any technical difficulties, let us know and we will try to help you do that. Jason, will you please get us started? Or did I leave anything out? That was a lot of information kind of rolling down.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so let me hide all the controls and get all the Zoom stuff organized here. There's a little bit of Zoom trauma from like teaching on Zoom for 2 years, you know, like you get back onto space and it's kind of challenging sometimes. Hello, everybody. As Mark said, thank you all for being here tonight. You know, we wish we could be there in person, as Mark said, but still really appreciate this opportunity to share our work with y'all. Much of the purpose of our work as Borderland Collective, as you'll hear about this evening, is to use art as a vehicle for collaboration. So although Mark and I, along with Luce, will be doing the talking, Borderland Collective is a representation of many people's imaginations, personal stories, and hard work. You'll hear me say we throughout this presentation, and that we represents these many, many collaborators from over the years. I'd like to start with a quote that sums up much of what we are after in our practice. Spanish philosopher Fina Berrules writes, quote, "While storytelling does not solve any problem and does not master anything forever, it adds yet another element in the repertory of the world. It is a way for human beings to leave a lasting presence in the world, not as a species, but as a plurality of whos." And this idea of storytelling and the idea of plurality of many voices is so key to what we do in our work. Borderland Collective is a long-term participatory art and education project based in Texas. The project utilizes collaborations between artists, educators, youth, and community members to engage complex social issues and build space for diverse perspectives, meaningful dialogue, and varying modes of creation and reflection. We are a fluid and dynamic group that is constantly shifting and evolving in response to the different projects we do in classrooms, community spaces, and institutions. The collective in Borderland Collective therefore references a mindset rather than a set group of members. We hope this broad coalition of voices, this plurality represented in our projects, helps contribute to a better world, one where we can listen closely and learn deeply from each other's stories. I started Borderland Collective in 2007 along with public school teacher and childhood friend Ryan Sprott as a way to complicate the narratives about our homeland through a fusion of education and art. We both grew up in San Angelo. You see the red dot there in the middle of nowhere. It's a fairly isolated community in West Texas that sits just a couple of hours north of the Texas-Mexico border. Its history reaches back to early nomadic peoples that used the waters of the Concho River as a source of life in an otherwise pretty desolate environment. If you've never seen this part of Texas, it is flat. It's mostly farming, ranching, and oil land with very little water. It's a dry, flat land. In the late 19th century, San Angelo formed part of the frontier line of Anglo movement west. Sitting in the heart of Comancheria, you see outlined there in red, the extensive homeland of the Comanche people beginning in the mid-1700s, Apache and Humano before them. The narratives most privileged in San Angelo come from the city's past as part of this American frontier, as well as more like contemporary role in global cotton and oil production. These narratives come from a mentality entrenched in the myth of the West, where still today there's a strong kind of romantic imagination for this glorious old days of cowboys or open, quote, free land and endless opportunity. You can see Fort Concho there. That's where San Angelo is. So Ryan and I, every year in grade school, went to that fort, the local historic fort called Fort Concho, to learn about the kind of, quote, taming of the frontier. It was often presented to us by folks like these frontier reenactors. So the myth of the West was strong in our upbringing. At the same time, I was being taught this kind of mythical and limited history of my homeland in school. I was starting to make pictures of the world around me, albeit in pretty rudimentary way. I made these photographs with a disposable camera when I was about 8 years old or so, probably from the backseat of our family minivan as we headed out west for summer vacation, something my family repeated often. Most often we visited iconic landscapes like the Grand Canyon, which I photographed here with a disposable panoramic camera, if anybody remembers those. Our vacations were relatively traditional American West tourist experiences. The one difference, though, I think, was that my dad was serious about landscape photography. And so throughout my childhood, I was engaged in slow and meaningful looking as I stood next to my dad. What I love about this picture is that you see the tripod leg of my dad's camera set up on the right side of the frame as I stood next to him, mimicking his perspective. So from an early age, I was engaged with history, ideas of place, particularly the American West, and picture making and photography, and really obsessed with pictures, but all of it from a fairly privileged and myopic position. It was only after leaving San Angelo to study geography and history at the University of Texas, and then later photography in Illinois, that I learned about significant community stories and historical voices that were missing from both my educational experience and from the larger collective narratives about West Texas, the Borderlands, and the American West. For example, quote, Mexican Americans in San Angelo protested the inferior education that their children received in segregated schools by completely boycotting the Mexican American schools in 1910 to 11 and 1914 to 15. So San Angelo was one of the first places where Mexican Americans protested and boycotted the school systems for the de facto segregation of the time, nearly 50 years before the well-known Chicano school blowouts of the 60s and 70s. This was never taught, talked about, or recognized in our community. In response to this kind of newfound historical knowledge and more critical disposition and thinking about place, the history of land, where I'm from, and photography, Ryan and I came together and decided to experiment with the integration of education and art practices as a way to challenge the privileged and singular myths of the Borderlands and the West that we inherited growing up in Texas. We started with an essential question, and that essential question carries forward with us today. What role can we play in creating spaces that support the creation and distribution of more complex narratives and histories? The first project took place in Big Lake, Texas, where Ryan was teaching at the time. It was an experiment in collaboration with 12 high school students, exploring how a place could be lyrically mapped through the diverse perspectives of its youth. A small oil and ranching town, Big Lake is only about 1 square mile in size, although its margins fluctuate with each passing oil boom and bust. We turned to photography as one of the main vehicles of participatory expression, partly because it was my area of artistic practice and longtime obsession, as you just saw, but also because photography is a language of time and place, a way to index the geographies that we inhabit and invite others to see the things in the world that are important to us at a particular moment in time. Photography is really about pointing at something and asking somebody to look at it with you. The Big Lake High School students were given point and shoot digital cameras and invited to explore their community and share their personal, familial, and cultural experiences through pictures. Whether it was a portrait of the women who run the local town and country convenience store dressed in red, white, and blue, a roadside sign honoring one of their own who is stationed in Iraq, or the intimate spaces of their own homes, the students created a visual archive of their daily worlds and firsthand experience and perspective, or firsthand perspective of the experiences of rural life in the borderlands. In doing so, they disrupted traditional stories about whose voices mattered in the small town and helped set the groundwork for Borderland Collective's art and education practice, which really begins with daily life, meets people where they are at, and sees great value in localized, place-based actions. Another of our early projects was Mivos, which took place in 2009 in the border cities of Presidio, Texas, Ojinaga, Mexico, with 8th graders who called both sides of the border home. Similar to Big Lake, we invited them to make photographs that framed important parts of their daily world. Sometimes they returned with pictures of the physical borderland itself, like this lush oasis in the desert, formed by the joining of the Rio Grande and the Rio Conchos. And often they would make pictures of the everyday moments of life, such as being a teenager with their family, not signifying of the border in any traditional way, which then becomes just as significant in talking about what the border actually looks like. And again, photography was a central component of the project, but we also invited them to create mental maps to describe the topology of their community, such as this map by Samantha, who interestingly flipped north and south, putting Mexico at the top of the map and with larger emphasis, not as a political statement, but simply because those are the places she spent more time in and valued more in her life. The creative gesture of something as simple as a personal mental map or a photograph of a sister hiding her face on a pink living room carpet has the ability to shift our understanding of how this political line is perceived by those actually living on it, which in turn can contribute to new ways of understanding the borderland as a rich and multifaceted place. It's important for the work made in our projects to be seen in the world and therefore become part of our contemporary culture. So all of our work is presented and exhibited in multiple ways. With the Mivos project, we made small on-demand books for the students in their community, as well as postcard sets that have been shared around the world, like you see here, providing another or a counter view of the US-Mexico border. Soon after Mivos, we began work on a 2-year-long collaboration with 3 displaced families living at the Wurzbach Manor apartment complex in San Antonio, Texas. They were the Day family from New Orleans, displaced during Hurricane Katrina, the Pamu family, religious refugees from Burma, and the Nyankuru family, who came from Tanzania by way of Rwanda, where they escaped the 1994 genocide. In this project, we stepped out of the school setting and into the living rooms of the families, guided by Carrie Halpert, who is an activist teacher in the school district. Carrie invited us along to do art projects with the children in their homes, which then turned into this longer collaboration over 2 years to share their stories of resettlement. Similar to the Mivos project, these families also made pictures of moments of their daily lives, in this case, far from home in a nondescript 1970s apartment complex in San Antonio. They shared important personal pictures from family albums, like this birthday picture of Miss Love. Made drawings of their memories, such as this made of a school in the Mela refugee camp in Thailand by Pa Ki. And wrote poems like this by Daphrose, matriarch of the Nyankuru family. It reads, Rwanda, 23 years in that house. You build your house, mud. You hear the rain, tut, tut, tut. I remember my garden. Then the war comes. The work from this project was presented in book format, and the work was also exhibited at the main public library in downtown San Antonio, a central meeting place for diverse audiences to interact with the stories of these 3 families. As you can see from those examples of our early projects, there's quite some fluidity in the way we work in and out of schools, shorter and longer term, with students alone or extended families and other community groups. Northern Triangle was an exhibition that demonstrated even another mode or model for the way Borderland Collective can and has worked. One that's responsive to acute contemporary issues, yet still connects to the values of listening, dialogue, and collective creation and participation that we seek. And although Mark and I had been talking about work and sharing ideas for years, it was with this project that Mark really started to become a major part of Borderland Collective. In the summer of 2014, a humanitarian crisis in Central America began to impact our southern border, as more than 68,000 unaccompanied minors and thousands more women and families came seeking refuge from the stark rise in violence and persecution happening in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, a geographical region known as the Northern Triangle. In response to the political fervor that started to gather around this issue in Texas, Mary Heathcott, director of Blue Star Contemporary Museum in San Antonio, asked Borderland Collective to create some kind of exhibition or programming that would address what was happening and engage the public in constructive discourse. The first thing I did was reach out to Mark because he has roots in El Salvador, lived there as a kid during the Civil War in the 1980s, and has gone back to work in collaboration with the displaced communities in places like Santa Marta for many years. Using the timeline and the archive as conceptual points of reference, we flipped the gallery into a classroom of sorts and built a constellation of historical and contemporary photographs, art objects, maps, news reports, and political documents, looking specifically at the circular narratives present in the United States' long history with Central America. To achieve such, we worked with various archives, libraries, and human rights organizations, including the South Texas Human Rights Center, which places blue water barrels with Red Cross flags on private lands along the border in an effort to save lives. In addition, we invited participation from a small group of artists who were already making work about border issues, such as Adriana Corral, whose work you see here. Adriana uses minimalist frameworks to speak not just about violence against women along the border, but also the institutions and structures that hide and obscure our knowledge of what's really happening. This piece, a rubbing of redacted political documents, references the femicidios that were happening in Juarez, Mexico. Vincent Valdez, another artist we worked with, made line drawings of missing persons from Central American civil wars of the 1980s, pulled from a calendar called The Disappeared. Mark included a number of pictures he made in Santa Marta and Valle Nuevo, El Salvador, two communities formed by Salvadorans who repatriated in 1988 after living in a Honduran refugee camp during the peak of the Civil War. The photographs were made in collaboration with community members as a way of representing that which people were presenting to Mark as important sites of the war. For example, Pastor showed Mark this container placed in the community by the UN to collect guns that were turned in after the peace accords were signed in 1992. I also included some of my more recent personal work about the landscape of surveillance that has cloaked the region since 9/11, when the militarization of the border began to expand exponentially. The photograph you see here is just yards from the Rio Grande along the Texas-Mexico border near Presidio, the same place we spent time working with youth on the Mi Voz project you saw earlier. The Border Patrol agent sits in a deterrence posture, watching. Through my camera, I'm watching them watching, shifting at least a little the hierarchy of looking. The complexity of the Northern Triangle exhibition experience is meant then to not only disrupt the binary debates around immigration, us versus them, legal versus illegal, here versus there, but also to provide multiple entry points across time and geography. At each of the 6 sites around the country that the exhibition traveled to over the 4 years it was running, we engaged local communities in conversation through associated programming such as gallery tours and workshops. Here you see Mark working with students in the Ghanian Gallery at Washington and Lee University as they explore their own migration stories. In the summer of 2018, we worked on a project called La Esperanza de Ser Yo, The Hope of Being Me, titled by one of the student participants, Yadira. We were invited by the San Angelo Education District to work with their migrant farm worker youth program that supports students whose parents work in the agricultural industries of Texas. Much like the Mivos project, we invited the students to make photographs of their daily lives, such as this picture made by Sophia, taken from the dairy farm where her father works in Miles, Texas, a small farming community near San Angelo that's politically conservative, yet also heavily reliant on migrant labor to sustain their economy. These pictures open a window onto a world that an urbanized society rarely sees or engages with, yet often takes for granted. The beauty of rural life and an intimacy with the natural world emerges, but so do the hierarchies of a food system that devalues the realities of labor and the sacrifices of migrant families to provide for the rest of society. For this project, we also made portraits of the students that were printed on drawing paper, which they then illustrated in numerous ways, speaking to their personalities, identities, and dreams. Yadira's in the center says, I am brave, daring, fun, humble, good, determined, nice, grateful, and reasonable. And from just a week working together, we produced a small newsprint publication. This is a collective letter or poem to the community that inhabits the center spread of the newspaper. An excerpt from it reads, "You should know that my family are good people. I am from the country with horses where the land is wet. I'm going to be the first person that goes to the sun." The newspapers were placed in every store in town and distributed at the local high school. The photographs were printed large scale, along with the collective letter to the community, and hung on the windows of multiple buildings on Main Street in the small farming community. Which leads us to the current project opening next week at the Washington State History Museum, All the Sacrifices You've Made, or Todos los Sacrificios que has Hecho, a collaboration between Borderland Collective and the College Assistance Migrant Program, or CAMP, at the University of Washington. So in the fall of 2018, Mary Michael, Director of Exhibitions at the Washington State History Museum, reached out to Borderland Collective, asking if we would be interested in doing some kind of exhibition or project addressing migration in Washington. Mary Michael and Mark and I have a long history. Mary Michael was the gallery director at Texas State for many, many years, and actually gave Borderland Collective our first show in 2009, I think. So coincidentally, while working on the La Esperanza project that summer, the folks at the San Angelo Region Office told me how awesome the Washington State Migrant Assistant Program is, just in conversation. And they told me about someone named Luce, who was doing amazing work there. So when Mary Michael reached out, we knew we had to contact Luce. So Mark and I reached out to Luce and invited a conversation about how we might be able to work together. We're going to shift here into more of a discussion. Mark, you want to jump in, and Luce jump in, and we can talk about this current project.
Yeah, definitely. Jason, thank you so much for giving that great overview kind of some of the projects that we've done that have gotten us here. And I think that if you notice that one of the best things in all of this is we've always been able to work with amazing community advocates and partners. We're always striving to not make work about people, but to make work with people. And I think that one of the biggest questions that we ask anytime we're working on a project is who do we need to be learning from? Who do we need to be growing with? Who do we need to be working with? And as Jason mentioned, that person was very clearly, even from the very beginning, Luce. And so Luce, I was wondering if you could just take a few minutes and tell us about the CAMP program and what the CAMP program is.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure working with both of you during these last few years on this project. And like Mark mentioned, my name is Luce, and I was the former camp director at University of Washington. We're stationed in Seattle, Washington. And I was, when it comes to the camp program, just a little bit about it. The camp program, also known as the College Assistance Migrant Program, is a federally funded program by the Department of Education. And its mission and goals are to support students that come from migrant and seasonal farm working backgrounds pursue a degree in higher ed. And what that means is that the camp programs, you can find some of them across the United States. We are lucky that we have a handful in the state of Washington. But why this work is so important is that these are students that come usually from in the state of Washington, a Latino background, often coming from a family that has a rich history around migration, which means they're usually the first to attend college. They don't have family members that are, or anyone to pass on kind of the roads of how do you succeed in higher ed. And I was a camp student myself at the age of 18, and it really drove my success as a now professional. And if it wasn't for the camp program, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And so my love for the camp program is really because it really opens doors for many. It breaks the cycle of poverty in our communities. It helps migrant students or students that come from agricultural background really find their voice and their passion and their studies. And then a lot of our students always want to go back to their community and pay it forward. And so it really is a program that helps first-year college students at their institution. And it helps students with mentoring, with academic support. It's a familia away from home. Often our students feel homesick because they're not near family. And so it really builds that familia, that support system that a lot of us come from and rely on. And our goal is really to support students get to graduation once they're on our campus. And what you see is students that are eager to want to do well and give back. And all they really need is a little bit of support to get there. And some of this process with the camp program starts as early as high school, because we have recruiters that start working with students when they're in high school to get them academically prepared to apply, but also be on track to be admissible to the institution. And just, I'll leave it with, like, it really is a program that builds access and really is about retention once they get to campus. And then we give them the skills and the support that they need to get to their degree of choice. And it really is about breaking the cycle of poverty and helping students continue to be an active member in their community and try to help their community as they kind of continue to go through their academic journey. But yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Jason.
Yeah, and Lucy used the word familia, right? That I think was so, for me, so accurately describes kind of the feeling of what it's like to be not just with the students, but with the staff that is there. And how many cohorts have there been now at UW?
At UW, we're on cohort number, sorry, don't quote me. I've been a little bit removed during this COVID time, but we're on cohort number 13, I believe. And I started working with the program with cohort number 1. But I think of the institution I come from, Central Washington University, they're going on over 20 cohorts of students, 25 cohorts of students, right? So the impact that these programs are having nationwide is phenomenal. Like, if we think of all the programs across our country and how many lives they're changing, I think of just the doctors we've graduated at University of Washington, the dentists we've graduated, the teachers, the people going into law, and just the amount of contributions that the camp programs do to their communities is substantial. And there's programs that nationwide that have been around for 30 some years. And it really is a program that funding is requested for these programs to continue. So they have to apply through a competitive grant cycle every 5 years. But it's a program that, like, I think of at the institution of University of Washington, our campus is over 45,000 undergrad students. And to think that our students are coming from small community, rural communities, they feel lost. They often feel like just a number at these big white institutions that tend to not be meant for them, or they don't see themselves in these spaces. And for them to have a sense of, like, this is my familia, this is my support system, really leads to their success. Camp programs across the nation tend to have a higher retention rate than the general student population because they built that community, they built that support. And so nationally, they're really successful in getting students to earn their degree, and often students are moving on to graduate studies.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Luce, you're still with the University of Washington. I know you said the former director. Can you tell us real quick what your job is now?
Yes. So I'm the current director for the Education Opportunity Program. And with CAMP, I was really focused on this cohort model of groups of students, right? All CAMP students. In my new role, I serve all students that are affiliated with our office, which is all the students of color. So I have the privilege of working with over 6,500 students or serving over 6,500 students on our campus. And my focus and the work that we do now is really around supporting all students of color, first generation, low income, or economically disadvantaged students. And we provide very similar support, but not as hands-on, but we really support students with advising, with financial scholarships, instructional support. But yeah, no, the reason it's still really near to what, and it drives my passion, is because a lot of the camp students end up being moved into the EOP program the second year.
Yeah, I remember when Jason told me, he kind of played a joke with me. If I remember, he said, he called me and said, Luce is no longer with the camp program. And I was like, what? You know, he said, but this is what she's doing. And I was like, oh, it just made total sense.
Yes.
And another thing I remember, Luce, is the first trip that Jason and I came out, and you so graciously created space for us to begin to work with cohorts. I think it was potentially, I think it was cohort 10. And we went in and we did a workshop with them where we were writing about our family stories from photographs. And then from there, we asked if there was any students from that who wanted to work more deeply on this project. And that was how we ended up identifying the main collaborators inside of this. And I also remember, this is us interviewing inside of your office. But I also remember, Luce, you piling in cars with us and driving out to the Yakima Valley and introducing us not just to the families of students and other people that you knew, but to your own family. And so, as I said at the very beginning, this project really would not be what it is without your gracious contribution and trust, and very importantly, your participation in the project as well, which we're going to get to talk a little bit about, or we get to hear from you in a different way here in just a few minutes. So, but Jason, I was thinking, Luce, thank you for sharing all that. Jason, I was wondering, because the exhibition is being installed next week, I was wondering if you could kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what people are going to see or what they're going to expect when they walk into the exhibition.
Yeah, sure. So some of you probably been into the museum, and so you know the space a little bit, but you go up the stairs and there's two galleries that are kind of facing each other, the Haley Gallery and the Gonyea Gallery. And we're going to be occupying both of those spaces. The Haley Gallery is, I guess, traditionally the collections gallery, where they pull stuff from the Washington State Historical Society collection. And we did that as well. So in addition to working with Luce and working with the students, we also went into the archives. And here's actually Luce and Courtney and Yaz going through the archives together. So we had them pull certain things out, and we were just like, what do the archives that exist now tell us about the history of farm work, the history of this group of students, their families, what's there, what's missing, and how can that inform what we include? And so that Haley Gallery is going to be it's kind of a parallel exhibition. It's going to be all work from the collections selected by Mark and I to kind of talk about the history of migration in the state of Washington. And so I have a couple of slides here of some of the things that you'll see. There's 25 pieces in that Haley Gallery. And 25 pieces is a lot, but it's also really incapable of telling the complete story and experience of all the many millions of lives in the region and all the stories of migration. But what we try to do is weave together a kind of historical narrative of sacrifice, of resilience amid struggles, and try to have the works serve as catalysts for introspection for the viewers, so that when they come in, they see this history, they see, yes, it's a fragmented history, it's not a complete history, it's impossible to have that, right? but that there's these pieces that kind of talk about important moments in Washington's history. There's things that are, clearly connected to United Farm Workers, to that farm worker history, to Cesar Chavez and the farm worker movement coming into the Yakima Valley in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, and really continuing through to the modern times. There is, posters that represent that time period as well that will be in the show. There's going to be a big vitrine. So like this button will be in a vitrine. But there's also these other things like this. This is, I think, a really tiny, 4x6 photograph that's going to be hung on the wall of box houses. So these boxes that are used for picking, and then when they're stored in the off season, they formed these houses. And we saw some of that when Luce was driving us through. Yeah. And so part of it was also, reflecting on what's in the archive compared to what we're seeing in the contemporary world, and this kind of connection. But we also extended this idea of migration out to a larger population beyond, Latino or Mexican American farm workers coming from Mexico or Central America, and thought about Washington as a state of migration, but also as a state of, peoples that go back time immemorial. And so thinking about like all the peoples that have lived in Washington and the peoples that have come to Washington to look for work for various reasons, different times. You can see this is 1917, a black and white photograph from a glass plate negative of 3 boys, migrant apple pickers. And so when we use words like migrant and farm worker, that actually shifts with time, right? And who that is being directed at, and who. And so trying to talk about that complicated history, I guess, is important. And then, so that'll be one gallery. And then kind of facing that gallery is the Ghanian Gallery, which will include photographs from the students' family archives. And so here's an example, like Gabby had this picture that she photographed. She was at home and then shared that with us. Phil here is sitting with Mark, recording stories about some of the photographs that he shared with us. And so when you go into that space, you'll see these photographs. We've scanned them and then reprinted them and framed them, sometimes to scale, sometimes scaling up. We have a few that are really huge, where we've really shifted that scale. But the photographs that we scan, and we, Mark, you can talk about this too, but we purposely scanned the originals and didn't take the originals. And thinking about that history of the archive and like the taking of artifacts. And so it's a reproduction of the original, which was really important to us. And then, so you'll see these photographs kind of laid out. There'll be a video piece, which Mark can talk about in a minute. And you'll be able to engage also the students, and Luce and Natalia wrote about each of the photographs. So there will be text accompanying, like a extended caption with each photograph. So you can really engage with the work in a kind of meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think that conversation early on for us was really, really important, right? Was that I think so often institutions are used to getting the original photograph and then wanting that. But it was really about saying, well, no, why would we take the photograph out of the original context, right? These are, important family heirlooms and memories to have. And so while we can scan them and then they go back to the families, or in most of our case, they didn't even leave the family context at all because we took a scanner with us to do that. But I also think that one thing that is really important about this project too is that we printed a copy of each photograph in the exhibition, and that is being after being exhibited will go into the museum's archives as well. So a second copy was made for that purpose. So there will be something on site that researchers can view, but it is not the original. It is a scanned copy of it.
Right. That was and thinking about that relationship to the archive and like seeing where those gaps were. And one of the big gaps was that there was a lot of political work about the history of migrant farm worker, particularly like around United Farm Workers Movement. But there were missing were a lot of those family stories that we were hearing about. And like I love this picture, you know, like the bumper crop, right? That the Orfil talks about. And the you'll hear more about this, but the cultural, like the development of communities in these places, and bringing those things into the archives to complement what's already there, some of which is really you know, remarkable, but trying to fill those gaps with kind of interesting things.
So yeah, so when you walk into the space, you'll see a number of framed images on the wall, and as Jason says, some very large prints. And on the back wall, what you will see is you will see a 2-hour looping video playing. And the video, we kind of landed on this as a format because we were trying to think about, how do we include the voices of the project participants? How do we include the voices of the family that are talking about these photographs? And so with a really simple aesthetic, what we've tried to do in this video is just to recreate what was actually happening in people's homes and in Luce's office, or just in whatever spare office we could find on UW campus, where people showed up with a stack of photographs, and then we would turn on the microphone and begin to talk about that and say, what's happening in this photograph? And not just historically, but what's happening in your family? How are you thinking about this? And I think that one of the areas that I locate the most meaning in this project was hearing young people talk about their families, talk about the love that their families had for them, talk about the sacrifices, and even the title of the whole exhibition comes from that, because so many of the students were talking about what their parents had given, what their communities had given to help provide and to shape who they were. And so with that, we're going to shift, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to play about a 15-minute video. And this video is a compilation of 5 participant voices coming together in the gallery space, which you'll end up seeing on the back wall. Is, as I said, these vary from 20 minutes to 40 minutes, but all loop together. Is there anything, Luce or Jason, that you want to add before I share my screen here? Okay, great. So what we'll do is it's about 15.5 minutes long. And then after that, we will come back and we'll do some reflecting and sharing out. But also, here's the professor hat that I put on. I always tell my students, or not tell them, but invite them to have something to write with and something to write on. And I want to invite you to do the same. If there's anything that stands out to you, if there's a word or something that resonates with you, or you feel where something in someone's story that they're sharing rubs up against your own story, jot that down, make a note of it. And maybe when we come back together, we can talk a little bit about that. So here we go. Can you see that, Jason? Oops, give me 1 second. Let me check this. Great. Here we go.
My name is Luz Niges. I was born in Michoacan, Mexico, December 2nd, 1984, to a single mom. And I'm currently the director of the College Assistance Migrant Program at University of Washington. The program here serves students that come from migrant and seasonal farm working backgrounds in the state of Washington. This is my first communion. I did my communion at St. Joseph Catholic School Church in Yakima. It's one of the churches that our Latino community identifies with the most in the Yakima area. This dress, actually, my mom, we grew up really poor, just to name it. And so she couldn't afford to buy me a dress. So she went out and bought the different material. We went together. My mom didn't drive, so she would have to ask people for rides. And so a friend took us to the store, and we bought, my mom's like, well, what kind of material do you want for your dress? So we chose the material. And then we went to this lady's house in a little trailer, and she measured me. And I just remember the whole experience of my mom designing and helping me have someone make this dress for me. So on my first communion, I remember being really excited about the day, because it was definitely the first time that I felt like it was on me. The attention was on me, and I was able to choose my godparents, and the people I chose to be my godparents were two really nice a couple from our church, and they were very instrumental in my life growing up. And so when I think of this picture, I think of the memories that go into the attire that I'm wearing, the priest that did my first communion, and then the celebration that happened after Mass, but also just the joy that came from that day. It's one of the events that I have the most pictures of, and the celebration of my first communion, we went and did a carne asada afterwards, and we did it in a park that my brother ended up passing away when he was 19 at the same park because he worked there. So there's a lot of emotions that come with this day, because just so many people and so many memories that all kind of intertwine. And so, but yeah, I was in elementary. And I was the last one to do my first communion for my siblings.
In this photograph here, we have 4 generations. We have my great-grandfather, his oldest daughter, my grandma Esther, and then my dad, and then me as a 1-year-old. But each one of us had a very different experience. My great-grandfather was born in 1908, so he was a kid, and he lived through the revolution of Los Cristeros back in the 20s, and he was already about 16 or 17 when that was going on. And so, of course, at the time, they were living so poor in Mexico that they wouldn't even spend money on matches, right? So they would use sometimes if their fire ran out, they would strike this metal that they had with a stone and some tinder to relight the fire, or they would go find hopefully a friendly neighbor to give them a little piece of coal to start up a new fire. But yeah, of course, all that work was all done by hand way back when. I believe he had 10 children. One of those, of course, is my grandmother Esther, who had 13 children. One of those being my dad. They're all still alive today. And then her story was a lot different, because she never left town. She stayed, but all of her kids left to America. They all migrated, and I did speak with her, and she says that was one of the hardest things, each one of her sons and daughters leaving the country. Also, after that, well, my dad's generation was the one that left back in some came over in the 70s, most came in the 80s, and the last ones came in the 90s. And of course, they came over here and kind of had to pick things up as they go, English, work, things like that, and also send money back home, because, what else was I going to say? Oh, when my dad brought my mom up in the 80s, in 1988, they went 5 years without coming home, and after speaking with my grandparents, that was one of the hardest things. But when they came in 1993, when they came back to Mexico, with what little they had, they were able to make a difference. Bringing someone a pair of boots meant so much for them. Giving someone $20 was huge. That's something that no one had $20. So that was a huge moment for them, and then also for the people back home, and it was also a chance to make their parents and grandparents proud, of course. Then what else? Then of course my generation, or that little guy there, is me, and I'm kind of the next step. It's almost like just like a baton, like passing on from one baton to the next, because I grew up working alongside my dad in those same orchards that he's been working at since the 80s. I worked in orchards since I was 6 years old, and then the last summer I worked was the summer after my sophomore year of college. So it's still something very present, and I got to see a lot of changes. Nowadays they require you to, in most orchards, they require you to bring some sort of to actually bring ID in to make sure that you're at least 17 years old, or 16 or 17, to be able to work. being in the orchard was actually a really good experience because I got to learn about contract work and see that the faster I pick, the harder I work, the more money I make. You know, some guys there by lunchtime already made $400 because they would pick cherries or apples so fast. And I kind of took that idea into a lot of areas in my life, and whether it's the classroom, the football field, anything else, you know, just the harder I work, the better results I get.
Este carrito, este Subaru, es un Subaru Station Wagon.
Ajá.
Mis hijos, ¿cómo adoraban este carrito? Lo querían bien mucho ese carro porque ese carrito no se quedaba ninguna. En tiempo de la nieve,
Sí.
así de grueso de nieve y ese carro no se.
Sí, sí.
Bueno, y en ese tiempo yo vendí ese carro. Lo vendí y mis hijos lloraron. ¿Por qué lo vendiste, papi?
Sí, porque tenía un brazo flojo.
Es que un brazo de mi carro de la la llanta, a veces empezaba o sea, como tronaba.
Sí.
Y yo dije, no, este carro y el motor estaba buenísimo, ¿no?
Sí.
Yo por no arreglar ese brazo, dije, lo voy a vender.
Sí.
Y que lo vendo y no, mis hijos se pusieron bien tristes.
Sí, fue como en el 93 ahí.
This is one. So this is my mom, and it's so funny because when I was showing her the stack of pictures that I was taking, she said, "No, esa no." That's my mom in a nutshell. Yeah, she was out there working with my dad and my dad's cousins and other family members that weren't blood family members. But my mom doesn't really talk about her experience in the fields very much. She's doing cherries. In this other picture, my dad was picking apples, but here my mom's doing cherries. Now she works sorting in a factory, and she's been doing that for a long time. Up until I was 18, she worked night shift, would go to work at 4, get off like at 3 in the morning, and my dad had the opposite shift. So that was like my experience growing up. 18 made me very independent to like sometimes have a parent around. But they were always doing their side hustles too. And so I think that it shows me, like when I look at this picture, I just see like the car my mom and dad paid off, the home they were able to buy, the lifestyle that they were able to provide for mostly me and my younger sister. My older siblings did get to reap some of those benefits, but my 2 older siblings definitely had a very much more difficult upbringing. And I think that has a lot to do with like what they decided to do with their lives, because they both didn't graduate high school. They did get their GED, and my brother is a chef, and my sister is a stay-at-home mom, and they're great at their work. But, you know, I think that their early education was just non-existent. And we know that early education is incredibly important.
So that's my mom, and she's pregnant with my older brother, and then that's my older sister. It's kind of funny to say because she's like smaller. So it's like I want to say little sister because she's tiny there. And I'm sure this area is also Wapato. And my aunt lives over there, so I visit over there sometimes, and I've actually never gone and seen it like this pretty with all the flowers, so I didn't know like it could be that pretty, and you could find the beauty in it at times, which is nice to see. And I feel like this is a different view of what you typically see, because you typically see them picking and the ladders and the cherries on the floor, but this is a different view. You could see these blossoms, and obviously she's not picking and she's not capable because of her pregnancy, which also is a different like take onto farm working, since it provides for a family, and how important work ethic is. Yeah, it kind of hits different because my mom is pregnant, and then my dad is probably taking the picture, and he's the one that's like working hard to provide for a family, and you get to see that.
I kind of want to talk about this one. When getting tasked for these pictures, my dad and my mom went through a ton of pictures, and they just picked out whatever they thought was adequate enough for what I try to explain to them. And they sent a lot of pictures of this reenactment of Jesus Christ being crucified. And I was interested because this was back probably late 80s, and I had never clicked that this was something that they did every year, but I didn't realize how long they had been doing this. And I kind of asked my dad about it, and he basically just told me that when this large group of immigrants started coming around the time when my parents settled down, they all decided that they wanted to do a reenactment at the local Catholic church, since a majority, if not all of the immigrants from Mexico were Catholic. And he just kind of explained that he felt like he made an impact to the community just because they were bringing in their culture, and that's one of the top moments when they finally got to intertwine the two cultures, because for so long it was just American culture, and he would always tell me how he would want to go get tortillas, or he would want to buy Coke and rice and beans, and all of these things were so expensive because no one was looking for them. Everyone was just wanting I don't know what American food would be, but it was definitely not tortillas and beans. So he would always talk about how before them it was hard to live as a Mexican because you just felt so lost in that world, because it was nothing like how you had imagined back home. So he told me that this was just one big step forward into finally integrating the Hispanic Mexican culture to our typical picket white vest American town, and he just really enjoyed it. And I feel now looking back to when we would go to the reenactment when I was younger, I didn't really realize why it was such a big thing and why everyone went, but it was crazy just seeing these herds of families. It just felt like the whole town was gathering just for this one reenactment, people I haven't seen in so long, and it was only 2,000 people in this small little town, and it was just crazy how they could hide away until this reenactment happened. And so it always was just close to my dad's heart whenever getting to participate. And in this picture, my mom's on the far left, and it's just kind of interesting because around this time she was probably my age or maybe a little older. And she's just creating her own path in a way where she's finally getting to enjoy her culture and finally live closer to the life she lived in Mexico. That's not my dad, but I do recognize most of these people, and it's just crazy because they'll have nicknames for my dad or my mom, and one of them for my dad was gangster. And it's just really weird to me. And then I realized that there's this whole time period where I wasn't alive. So all these things and these inside jokes happened. And these people shaped my town for what it is now. And it's weird because they had kids and I'm friends with their kids. And my parents are friends with them. And it's just this whole generational thing where it's just one big family in my town. Because we all share pasts, and we'll look at pictures and be like, hey, I found this picture of my parents and your dad's in it or your mom's in it. And I don't know, we all share the same background. It's kind of fun to talk about. And then just grow up and seeing how things change. It's always kind of interesting to think about.
So that is about 15 minutes of over 2 hours of people talking. And as we were editing the video, we were always just crying, right? Most of the time we're crying because it's just so meaningful and beautiful things people are sharing. But then the other times we're crying because we're just laughing so hard because of the joy and the stories that are found inside of that. So this will be what is on the back wall of the gallery when you walk in, and the participants' voices will be echoing throughout the gallery space. Well, not echoing, but being played throughout the gallery space, so you can hear them as you're looking at all these photographs. The last component of the gallery that you will find is a table. And on this table, there are a few questions that what we hope is that people, after looking at the photographs, after listening to the words and the stories that people are sharing, is that they'll be able to sit down and reflect a little bit on what they've seen and what they've heard, and primarily thinking about it through the lens of sacrifice. Really, the title of the exhibition includes that in there. And so Jason, will you go ahead and share that, share the screen with these questions up? And the idea is that on the table in this gallery space, these questions that Jason's about to pop up right here will be there, but then there will also be stacks of 3x5 note cards that people are able to write on and leave their responses in the gallery space on the table. And so when the gallery opens right here next week, there will just be blank 3x5 note cards. But week after week after week, as people come in and continue to contribute, the stacks will go from being blank to being written upon. And so you can not only think about the sacrifices in your own life, but you can begin to shuffle through the cards and read the responses of other gallery visitors. And we have used this method in the past, not these exact questions, but what we love is that this is the project and the work is always changing, and what you read on the cards is being shifted and changes by what you see on the wall, by what you hear in your ears, and where it's rubbing up against your own story. And then you, as the visitor, the people that are coming in, they're changing the work every single day, right? Because they're leaving things behind that other people can engage with. So we want to give you a little bit of an opportunity to potentially reflect on these questions here. How do you define sacrifice? What sacrifices have you made? And what sacrifices have others made on your behalf? And I love these questions because right at the kind of the top layer, right? You're like, oh, I know what a sacrifice is. But then when you have to start really thinking about it and kind of writing it down, there's so much that can potentially go on underneath that, right? You can think about your own sacrifice, or the sacrifices of others, but as you begin to go deeper into the questions, right, there's so much that is there. So we are going to just kind of leave these questions with you, and we're now going to just kind of open up the chat room for some questions, for some feedback. And there's kind of three areas that we want to invite you to kind of share out from. One is you just watched a 15-minute video of hearing multiple voices, and I invited you to jot down some things that stood out to you or things that were meaningful to you. So you can go ahead and drop those in the chat if you just want to share them, or we'll read out. So that's the first one. The second thing that you can share out is a response to one of these questions, right? How do you define sacrifice? What sacrifices have you made? What sacrifices have others made on your behalf? And the third area that you can share out is just really anything. Are there any questions that you have, any comments that you have from the past hour of Jason sharing about the history of Borderland Collective, of Luce sharing about her incredible work that she's doing at UW, or about the video? So really just anything, and we will just open up that chat and you can drop stuff in. And Jason and Luce, feel free to add anything if there's any thoughts that you have from these questions or from the videos or anything that I've left out. Luce, is there anything that stood out to you from hearing the voices of the videos?
Yes, I think it was really sweet to hear the video where there was multiple voices in the video, the dad, the mom, and the son, right? So I just loved how that was so nice to hear, just like having family conversations about what the car meant to them. And
Yeah.
it warmed my heart to kind of just see how that was captured that way.
I think that it's interesting, right? As you're capturing audio for a project, you're kind of like, it's always this balance, right? You're like fully engaged, trying to be fully engaged in what's happening, but you're also like trying to listen for this like this, am I getting the thing that we need for the exhibition? And when we were with Moises and we were out in the orchard with his family, it's just kind of all that just went out the window, right? And it was like full on immersion. We just set the recorder up and we had there, I think there was probably like a dozen photo albums that came out, and we were just, I mean, story after story after story. So it was just such a beautiful process. So we got one question here from Mary Michael Stump, the amazing Mary Michael Stump. Okay, the sense of collective community that comes through and the deep foundation that the students take with them from that community. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things that I think about, I pointed to that word that Luz shared, familia, and that connection exists amongst the students for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Mary Michael, that reflection on the work.
Yeah, I think that idea of community is something that you'll see so many times in both the historical work and the both gallery spaces, right? With the archives work and this work from the students, and like, how do we build community, especially in this case, we're thinking about migration and moving from a home to a new place, and how do you build the community? And then how does photography play into that, which I'm always fascinated with, is like, and I mentioned this with some of the work from, Big Lake and Mivos and such, that like the camera is this way that we have this desire to kind of hold on to these moments that are really special to us, right? And then to pass those on to our children. Photography is also, it's like this way of communicating with our progeny. It's our, like a way of time traveling, in a sense of like saying, this is what was important to us at that moment, or this is the bumper crop of apples we had, or this was the Catholic Church ritual that we developed as a community. And those like how the photographs are relaying these ideas of community is interesting. Like somebody else put in here, I think I've been in a car with that many cousins.
One of the things that Luz spending time with you and families in Yakima, thing that changed for me is I can't walk into a grocery store and ever look at a stack of apples the same way. It's something that that I love and I cherish. And I think it's like different times, I'm like struggling through and the kids are, asking for this or asking for that. And I'll just kind of be stopped and be like, oh, and I'll just kind of in a way go back to being in the orchards and right. An apple has never tasted as good as it tastes there. So, yeah. So another question in, how did your perception of migration shift in thinking about Washington State versus the southern border? Yeah, I think that there were some things that were very different and some things that were very similar. I think that a lot of the families that some of the families that we talked with had roots in Texas, right? And so they came from the same region, and looking at the history of migration, you began to see that. I do think that one of the things that in particular that I'm involved with in my circles here is that many of I'm involved in a lot of work with individuals that are seeking asylum. And so coming of some very, very traumatic events very near. So happening this week, this month, this year. And I think that one of the differences that I saw was this beautiful rootedness and community in the Yakima Valley that really gave me a lot of hope for the work that is happening here in my own community now. Jason, I don't know if you can, if you want to speak to some of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you've heard me talk about, like land is so interesting to me and thinking about the land. And so one of the things that really stood out to me, I remember Luce, we're like driving, you go over the mountains, which were mind blowing to us because we're from the flatlands, right? And so one thing, you're going over the mountains, is snowing and all this stuff. And you come out into the valley and I was like, whoa, we're in Texas. Like this is West Texas, right? There's, it looked like the Big Bend region of Texas, and the Columbia River looked like, parts of the Rio Grande. It had more water than the Rio Grande does now because of irrigation issues and stuff. But the landscape was really interesting. And Mark and I were like walking through the hills, through sagebrush, and I was like, this looks so familiar. It feels familiar. The light is familiar. And we looked it up, and the sage is actually a band of sage that essentially also migrates from the Chihuahuan Desert region. So there's this connection between where we're from and Washington State that I didn't know about before in such a kind of clear way. And that was really beautiful to see in the land, but also in the stories of the students. Yeah.
Yeah, I also really think about the labor movement, you know, and so Cesar Chavez's work is so present in some of the archives and museums and just the everyday realities there. And I know that in coming back to San Antonio, where I'm located, it really made me begin to think about that. And there's an amazing woman named Emma Tanayuka, who was part of the pecan workers strike here in the 1930s. And, you know, many people, right, activists talk about Emma's work, but her work is not as visible in this community as it needs to be. And thankfully, there has been the past year, there has been some movement around that. And so I think I was really encouraged by a lot of the work that I saw, not just in museums, but in other institutions there as well. Jason, you want to, so what about the historical objects, artifacts, ephemera? What was the response overall from the participants in this project?
So what was the response overall? Oh, like when we were looking at the,
yeah, like when you were in the collections. Yeah.
I can share a personal story.
Yeah.
So one of the artifacts at the museum was these calendars that this grocery store used to print. And I remember being really young, and when we wanted authentic Mexican food, we'd go to it. It was called El Ranchito. And we would drive on a Sunday with family to El Ranchito. And every so often there'd be like, oh, we need to go because they're handing out the yearly calendars. And I just remember seeing a calendar that was dated to like before my time. So for me, it was a moment of realization where I'm like, man, this store has been in our valley longer than I even could have imagined. And I remember taking a picture and sending it to my cousin that had relocated to Arizona and saying like, do you remember these? And she's like, oh my God, yes. Because it was part of our community to like, that was something that if you grew up in the community, you would recognize, because every Latino household or Mexican household had them by their like dining table because they had a picture of a saint or had some type of like meaningful picture on it. And so that was one, and I was there that day. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I remember that. And we had, it was really great because again, it was like that, you know, I talked about the artifacts being a catalyst for introspection, for storytelling. And like so often it's like you walk in and you see this thing and it sparks something in your own experience. And then you tell the story of that to me. And then now I know all about this like place that existed in your, you know, and so I think the storytelling that came, I do remember we did this like little kind of exercise with like, there were 5 of us there, I think that day or something. And we did a little exercise on note cards, like what's here, what are you seeing? And I don't have them in front of me, but I do remember, you know, somebody saying like, you know, my story's not here. Like I see these like political documents and things, but I don't see exactly my story. And so I think that was one of the things that we really took forward in thinking about, again, is these like bringing in these family photographs and thinking about even like which, of course, there's a selection process that goes, I mean, we scanned way more than what's actually in the space. And so we were thinking about them, like we have pictures of people picking, but as Gabby pointed out so beautifully, we also have pictures of like, you know, on a Sunday afternoon with the cherry blossoms and like the car and like the crucifix, you know, the Catholic Church ritual and like the one of my favorites, Natalia's like parents when they were really young and like the heart shape and like those kinds of things to build out those ideas of what, you know, was missing, which was brought up when we were talking about it with all the participants.
You know, one question I have for y'all, when we started this project, the world looked very different, right? We were, this is pre-COVID, and sometimes I refer to a double pandemic, right? We also had the murder of George Floyd, which brings so many issues of institutionalized racism to a head as well. How has this been for y'all? And I know I'm kind of talking to myself too, right? In this, but right, this is not what we thought we were going to be doing when we started this work, and 3, you know, really intense trips of working and every day kind of doing it. How has this been for y'all, and thinking about this work over these past 2 years during the pandemic?
I can start. I mean, you know, well, there's a lot, as you said at the very beginning, there's a lot of sadness and not like kind of like, because we worked with that cohort, we were going to have the show and then everybody's going to be there. It was even going to be like a 10-year like celebration, and we were talking about the food and all this stuff. And then to not have that is been tough. You know, and it's been also really hard because, you know, you're like, kids are on Zoom school and then you're teaching on Zoom and you're trying to just like manage, and then, you know, people get sick and, you know, so all that stuff. And it's like hard, it's been hard to focus on it in the same way that some other shows and stuff have happened. On the other hand, I will say that I've sat with the work for 2 years, right? Like, which was unexpected and unplanned, but I've been looking at these pictures like for so long that they've seeped into me in a way that's actually really beautiful. And so I don't really like silver lining ideas or whatever, but just like that's one thing that I've felt, I guess, from the work.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, I've learned so much from you, Mark and Jason, that this has been a really beautiful experience. And then kind of being removed a little bit from it because of the pandemic and just the day-to-day stuff with my 2 kids and, you know, working from home. I'm just glad to be engaging in this work again. I'm excited to take my family and invite my family from Yakima to come to see the exhibit. I'll make sure to like send you some stuff when I'm there when it opens. But, you know, I have the privilege that I don't live too far from Tacoma, so I can drive down there, and I hope to make it a very special evening with my family and my loved ones, and just do an evening at the museum. I think when I'm talking about like during the pandemic and how this affected the migrant community in the Yakima Valley, it was really hard to see how they were impacted, because a lot of the migrant community in Eastern Washington does tend to be undocumented, and seeing people just go through the financial hardship. And our Latino community was hit really hard during the pandemic. The amount of infection rates were really high among the migrant community. And so to kind of finally see the state after a year and a half really turn itself, the policies around, and really help with emergency funding. And they invested millions of dollars into helping the seasonal and migrant community in the state of Washington, because they were really impacted by the pandemic. And it's nice to see that some stuff is changing around supporting that specific community. They've done a big movement to let them to really fight for undocumented students, undocumented migrant workers to qualify for sick leave. And so there's been, I think, a movement to really help the migrant community in the state of Washington, and help with some housing, and really just supporting the people that pick our fruit, that when we sit at a dinner table and we're not maybe financially impacted by the pandemic, and we can go and buy food and eat it nicely with our dinner, what we saw was a decrease of produce at the grocery stores, right? So people were like, oh, why are these so expensive? Or why is there not that many apples? And what? So I think it really drove the discussion around our state about really taking care of those individuals that really contribute to our state and in our economy. And so it's one of those things that I think being here, I was able to kind of just sit back and see how the pandemic affected them a little bit differently. But I'm so glad that the state is really moving towards some policies and changes to benefit our community.
Yeah. Thank you, Luz. One of the things that I think about too, Jason, I definitely resonate with sitting with this work. And for me, particularly the voices, right, that have just been, I've been living with y'all's voices for years now. It's been really beautiful. And they've seeped into me in different ways. But I also, you know, when we would get updates or be in touch with folks about the work, or we would be, you know, writing captions together, one of the things that I was always just reminded of is the amazing resilience of this community and of these families and people that we've been working with, and was just reminded of that over and over and over again through this. So we are hoping to be able to be in person for an event in April. And so I encourage all of you to stay in touch with the museum and communication. The hope is to have some kind of mid-show run in-person event. And we would love to invite each and every one of you to be there. And hopefully we will all get to celebrate in a different way in person. This is bringing us up to time, and it's a Saturday night. I really want to honor all of our evenings to be able to get back to family or what we were doing. Just want to close with a sincere, deepest thank you that I can. Luz, to you and to your family. Orful, to you and your family. Moises, to you and your family. Alondra, to you and your family. And Gabby, to you and your family. I hope that that you are on the other end of this video. And I think Jason is putting up a video or a slide here of all of our you know, collaborators and contributors from not just this project, but from past projects as well. I just want to honor them. Jason, Luz, do you have anything to add in closing?
I think, yeah, this is everybody who's projects I talked about tonight. These are the people that contributed to it. So I just wanted to say thank you to all those people. And there's many more from other projects, but and then just to kind of end, to jump on your idea. So April 21st is our hopefully that's when we're coming, right? Which I think is a Thursday, to do an event. But the show opens February 5th and it's open through October something. It's through October. So it's up for a long time. So there will be plenty of time to go see it. And if you go see it, you know, take pictures of it, send it to us, because we don't know what it looks like. We won't be there in person until April. You know, so I hope you get to go see it, and I hope we get to see you in person in April. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Take care, y'all.
Bye.